It started with a feeling, an unshakable sense that something wasn't right. For weeks, I had noticed subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. She was more distant, her phone seemingly glued to her hand, and she started coming home later than usual with vague excuses about work or errands. At first, I dismissed my suspicions as paranoia. After all, we had been married for 8 years. We'd built a life together, shared dreams, and weathered storms. But as the days turned into weeks, the doubts gnawed at me, refusing to be ignored. One evening, while Lisa was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. We'd always respected each other's privacy. But this time, something compelled me to look. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I unlocked her phone, something I'd never done before. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were dozens of messages between Lisa and a contact saved under a generic name. But the content was anything but generic. Flirty texts, explicit photos, and detailed plans for their next meeting painted a picture I couldn't unsee. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of anger. How could she do this? How long had this been going on? I scrolled through the messages, piecing together the timeline. The affair had been happening for months, right under my nose. While I was working late to provide for us, she had been sneaking around, betraying the trust we had spent years building. When Lisa came out of the shower, she was all smiles, completely unaware that her secret had been exposed. "Hey, babe," she said casually, toweling her hair. "What do you want for dinner?" I couldn't even look at her. "Whatever you want," I muttered, my voice tight. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying every interaction we'd had in recent months. The lies, the excuses, the subtle shifts in her behavior. It all made sense now. By the time morning came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I needed more information, more proof, before I decided how to proceed. After discovering Lisa's affair, I spent the next few days in a haze of disbelief and anger. My mind raced with questions I couldn't shake. How long had she been lying to me? Was this the first time, or had there been others? Did our marriage mean anything to her? But one thing was clear. I needed answers. I started gathering evidence. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. If I was going to confront Lisa, I wanted to make sure I had all the facts. I went through her phone when she wasn't looking, screenshotting messages, saving photos, and piecing together a timeline of her betrayal. It was worse than I imagined. The affair had started 6 months ago, with a man she met at a work function. Their messages revealed everything from late-night rendezvous to inside jokes that painted a picture of a relationship far deeper than I had expected. The final straw came when I found messages mocking me, jokes about how clueless I was and how easy it was to keep me in the dark. Reading those words felt like a dagger to the heart. One evening, I decided it was time to confront her. I couldn't sit silently, pretending everything was fine, while she continued to deceive me. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when I walked into the living room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up, surprised by my tone. "What's going on?" I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "I know about the affair," I said bluntly. Her face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing, her phone slipping from her hand onto the couch. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Don't play dumb, Lisa," I said, holding up my phone. "I've seen the messages. I know everything." Her expression shifted from shock to panic. "I can explain," she said quickly. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I repeated, incredulous. "So you didn't spend the past 6 months sneaking around behind my back? You didn't mock me in your messages with him?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "A mistake?" I said, my anger boiling over. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake isn't lying to your husband for months and carrying on an affair." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she begged. "We can work through this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head. "You didn't just betray me, Lisa. You disrespected me. You disrespected our marriage. There's no coming back from that." The rest of the conversation was a blur of tears, apologies, and excuses, but my decision was final. I told her I was leaving, that I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. She cried and pleaded, but I had already made up my mind. That night, I packed a bag and walked out the door, leaving her alone in the house we had once shared. As I drove away, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger, sadness, relief. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I deserved better than the life Lisa had given me. Leaving Lisa and the house we shared was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, but it was also the most necessary. I refused to stay in a marriage built on betrayal and lies. As I drove away that night, I felt a mixture of liberation and sorrow, freedom from her deceit but grief for the life I thought we had. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I stayed with a close friend, Jake, who offered me a spare room and a shoulder to lean on. "You did the right thing," he said one evening as we sat on his porch, sipping beers. "She didn't deserve you." While Jake's support was unwavering, the reactions from others were far more complicated. Lisa, unsurprisingly, went into full damage control mode. She called, texted, and emailed relentlessly, begging me to come home. Her messages swung wildly between remorse and anger. Tearful apologies followed by accusations that I was throwing away our marriage. "I made a mistake," one message read, "but you're being selfish by walking away instead of trying to fix this." Each time, I ignored her. Her pleas quickly evolved into a full-blown meltdown. Mutual friends began reaching out, telling me Lisa was a mess. She had apparently started airing our dirty laundry to anyone who would listen, painting herself as the victim of a husband who had abandoned her without warning. "You're ghosting her?" one friend, Sarah, asked during a phone call. "I'm not ghosting her," I replied, trying to keep my frustration in check. I confronted her about the affair. "She knows exactly why I left." Sarah hesitated. "She said she made a mistake and that she's trying to fix it. Don't you think she deserves a second chance?" "No," I said firmly. "Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice. And I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just because she feels guilty now." The hardest part was dealing with the reactions from Lisa's family. Her sister, Rachel, who I had always gotten along with, called me one evening, her tone accusatory. "Why are you doing this to her?" she demanded. "Doing this to her?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's the one who cheated, Rachel. She's the one who lied to me for months." "She's your wife," Rachel said. "Marriage is about forgiveness. And forgiveness is earned," I shot back. "Lisa hasn't done anything to earn it. She's only sorry because she got caught." After that call, I made the decision to distance myself from anyone who couldn't respect my boundaries. Meanwhile, Lisa's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She showed up at Jake's house twice, banging on the door and demanding to see me. Both times, Jake turned her away, his calm demeanor hiding the fact that he was ready to call the cops if she didn't leave. "She's spiraling," Jake said after the second incident. "Let her," I replied. "I'm done cleaning up her messes." What surprised me most was how many people sided with Lisa, despite knowing the truth. Friends I had considered close began questioning my decision, suggesting I was being too harsh or unwilling to give her a chance to make amends. "You're being stubborn," one friend said during an argument. "Nobody's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes." "Not everyone chooses to betray their spouse," I countered. "I'm not going to stay in a marriage just to make other people feel comfortable." Despite the pushback, I stood my ground. I refused to let guilt or societal expectations dictate my choices. The fallout from Lisa's meltdown was messy, but it taught me an invaluable lesson. Not everyone deserves your forgiveness, and it's okay to walk away from people who don't respect you. After weeks of relentless texts, calls, and uninvited appearances at Jake's house, I made the decision to go completely silent. I blocked Lisa's number, removed her from social media, and informed mutual friends that I didn't want any updates about her. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was necessary. Her constant attempts to manipulate and guilt me were toxic, and I needed space to heal. The ghosting wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation. Lisa's reaction to being cut off was immediate and explosive. She escalated her campaign, reaching out to anyone who might have access to me. Mutual friends began forwarding me screenshots of her dramatic posts on social media, where she painted me as the villain in our story. I made a mistake, and now I'm being punished for it, one post read. How do you fight for someone who won't even let you talk to them? Another post was even more direct. He abandoned me without warning. I thought marriage meant fighting for each other, not running away at the first sign of trouble. The responses from her friends were as predictable as they were infuriating. You deserve so much better, one person wrote. He clearly never loved you, said another. Reading those comments made my blood boil. Lisa was rewriting the narrative, conveniently leaving out the fact that she had been unfaithful. But instead of engaging, I chose to focus on what mattered, moving forward. The divorce process began shortly after I ghosted Lisa. I filed the papers quietly, not bothering to inform her directly. She found out when she was served at work, an act that only fueled her meltdown. How could you do this to me? She wrote in an email, the only channel of communication I hadn't blocked. I thought we were going to work through this. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the practicalities of untangling our lives. The house, which we had purchased together, became a sticking point. Lisa argued that she deserved to keep it, claiming it was her sanctuary, and accusing me of trying to punish her by taking it away. It's not about punishment, I told my lawyer. I just want a fair division of assets. I'm not letting her guilt me into giving up everything. The negotiations were tense, but I held firm. In the end, we reached a settlement that allowed me to walk away without any lingering ties to her. Throughout the process, I leaned on Jake and a small circle of trusted friends for support. They reminded me that I had made the right choice, even when the outside pressure felt overwhelming. You can't rebuild your life if you're still carrying the weight of her betrayal, Jake said during one of our late-night talks. He was right. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. Cutting ties with Lisa had been painful, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The days following the finalization of the divorce felt surreal. For so long, my life had been entangled with Lisa's, our routines, our shared plans, even our arguments. Now, with everything severed, I faced a blank slate. It was both liberating and terrifying. The first step in my healing process was reclaiming my space. I found a new apartment, smaller but cozier, and decorated it in a way that felt entirely my own. Gone were the remnants of Lisa's influence, the color schemes she liked, the furniture she had picked out. This space was a reflection of me, and every detail reminded me of the life I was building for myself. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. I also threw myself into work, taking on new projects and seeking opportunities to grow in my career. Staying busy helped distract me from the emotional weight of the divorce, but it also reminded me of my capabilities. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But healing wasn't a linear process. There were nights when the anger and sadness crept back in, catching me off guard. I'd replay conversations in my head, questioning if I could have done anything differently to save the marriage. During one of those nights, Jake gave me a piece of advice that stuck. You're allowed to grieve, he said. You lost someone you thought was your partner. But don't let that grief make you forget why you left. She wasn't the person you needed her to be. Those words became my anchor. I started going to therapy, something I had resisted for years. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally involved helped me untangle the web of guilt, anger, and betrayal that Lisa had left behind. My therapist helped me understand that leaving wasn't a sign of failure. It was an act of self-respect. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, she said during one session. Outside of therapy, I focused on rebuilding relationships with the people who had supported me through everything. Jake remained my rock, but I also reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Their warmth and encouragement reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like the world was against me. One of the most healing moments came during a quiet evening with my mom. She had been my biggest cheerleader since the divorce, always ready with a kind word or a homemade meal. I'm proud of you, she said as we sat in her living room, sipping tea. For what? I asked, surprised. For choosing yourself, she said simply. It takes courage to leave something that isn't good for you. Not everyone has that strength. Her words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had doubted myself, wondering if I had made the right decision. Hearing her affirmation felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had lost during my marriage. I picked up old hobbies, like photography and hiking, and even started volunteering at a local shelter, a cause I had always been passionate about but never found the time for. With each new experience, I felt a little more like myself. Looking back, I realized that the healing process wasn't just about moving on from Lisa. It was about learning to value myself again. Her betrayal had shaken my confidence, but it hadn't destroyed me. I had survived, and now I was thriving. Months after the divorce, I found myself standing on the edge of a hiking trail, camera in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The vibrant hues of orange and pink stretched across the sky, a breathtaking reminder of the beauty in the world. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. There had been sleepless nights filled with anger and grief, moments of doubt when I questioned whether I had made the right decision, and times when Lisa's betrayal felt like an inescapable shadow. But standing there, surrounded by nature's quiet majesty, I realized how far I'd come. The lessons I had learned along the way were profound. One of the most important lessons was the value of boundaries. For years, I had allowed Lisa to dictate the terms of our relationship, prioritizing her needs and wants above my own. Her betrayal forced me to confront the fact that I hadn't set clear boundaries, something I vowed to change moving forward. Boundaries weren't just about protecting myself from others. They were about respecting my own worth. Another realization was that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. For months, people had pressured me to work things out with Lisa, but I had come to understand that forgiveness was something I did for myself, not for her. Forgiveness didn't mean letting her back into my life. It meant letting go of the anger that had once consumed me. Lisa's infidelity had shaken my confidence, but it had also reminded me of the importance of self-respect. Walking away from our marriage wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of self-love. I deserved a partner who valued me, who chose honesty and loyalty over fleeting temptations. And if I couldn't find that, I was content to stand alone. As I rebuilt my life, I made a conscious effort to live in the present. Instead of dwelling on what I had lost, I focused on what I was gaining: new experiences, deeper relationships, and a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I started traveling more, exploring places I had always dreamed of visiting. Each trip became a symbol of my independence, a reminder that life didn't end with Lisa's betrayal. It began anew. Perhaps the most surprising lesson was gratitude. While I would never condone what Lisa had done, I had come to see her betrayal as a turning point, a catalyst that forced me to reevaluate my life and prioritize my own happiness. Her actions had pushed me to grow in ways I never thought possible, and for that, I was strangely thankful. Now, as I stood on that hiking trail, I felt a quiet sense of optimism for the future. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my ability to overcome whatever challenges came my way. To anyone who has ever felt broken by betrayal, I want to say this: you are stronger than you realize. The pain may feel insurmountable, but it won't last forever. In time, you'll find your footing again, and when you do, you'll discover a version of yourself you never knew existed: resilient, empowered, and ready to embrace the future. Here's to new beginnings, hard-earned lessons, and the courage to keep moving forward.